Hey, good morning. This is Catherine Bradley with the Office of Environmental Management with FDOT. Sorry we started a little bit late. We had a little bit of technical difficulty, but I think we're all good to go now. So I really appreciate you taking the time out to join us this morning for an overview of the new 2D and PD&E Guidebook. I will hope you use this new guidebook, and it'll be a help to make you make the concept plans coming from our PD&E studies more consistent from district to district and consultant to consultant. So before we get started, just a little housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the FDOT website to allow others who wanted to attend but couldn't view at their convenience. During this webinar, if you have questions, please feel free to post them in the question box. Our team will monitor the questions as they come in and address them at the end of the presentation or during the presentation. We may be breaking into Tally's presentation. So now let me introduce the two presenters. First, we have Lauren Bose. She's the PE, she's project manager and senior transportation engineer for Atkins. Ms. Bose has 14 years of engineering experience, ranging from PD&E projects to roadway and aviation design. She is responsible for contract management, document reviews, and training development through the engineering and PD&E support contract for OEM. Tally Roberts is a senior transportation engineer and associate for HDR. Ms. Roberts has 14 years of engineering experience, ranging from PD&E projects to roadway, drainage, and concept development. She is responsible for document reviews and training development through the engineering and PD&E support contract to us at OEM. So with that, I'll let you two take it over.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Catherine. Just wanted to get us started here with a couple of slides and talk to you about what we're going to be discussing today. So as Catherine mentioned, we're here to talk about the new 2D and PD&E guidebook that's being rolled out. It was originally published back in August, and we are having this webinar today to give you guys a little bit more information about what's included in there. So we're going to go through kind of step by step what you're going to see in the guidebook. We'll talk about the introduction, the goals of the 2D and PD&E guidebook, how we came up with it, the development of it, the research that went into it, some of the features that you are going to find on concept plans, base maps, and graphic typical sections. And then we're going to show you some examples. Next slide, please. Okay. So the purpose of the guidebook is to support the preparation of PD&E base maps, alternative concept plans, and graphic typical sections. These are very typical deliverables that are included in many PD&E studies, and so those are the topic for this guidebook. The guidebook establishes, oh, not quite. It establishes best practices for 2D PD&E deliverables, but it is not mandatory. We wanted to let you guys know that this is guidance at this time and that we would like to see it for better consistency, but it is not mandatory because we understand that there are some project-specific needs as you go through each PD&E study. The 2D, still not quite ready. The 2D graphics, the 2D PD&E guidebook only applies to 2D standards. There is separate guidance that is coming out for 3D tools in FDOT's 3D PD&E guidebook. We're going to talk about that here in just a second, but there's a webinar on it a week from today, same time, and we'll give you some more information about that at the end. Next slide, please. All right, so the goals of the 2D and PD&E guidebook. The first thing that we're going to do is define the 2D graphic products that are common to PD&E studies. Those include the concept plans that we talked about, the base maps, and the graphic typical sections. So that's what we're talking about when we mention that. Identifying layers that are common to most 2D PD&E graphic products. So this is going to be part of our features list where we identify layers or levels, depending on if you're using AutoCAD or Microstation, to that are common for these 2D PD&E products. Providing graphic consistency between projects. This is a big one because it's the main reason why this guidebook was developed. Over the course of the years of helping OEM review the engineering documents that come through OEM, we've noticed a lot of inconsistencies in the engineering documentation from across the state. And for example, if you're reading through a PER and it discusses something like right-of-way impacts or wetland impacts, but then you get to the concept plans and they're not shown and we don't know where those are. So the guidebook is a tool to use to go through and make sure that you're showing all of the relevant project information on your 2D graphic deliverables. Let's see. We also want to illustrate the graphic standards in areas where discretion may be required. As I mentioned earlier, we understand that there are project-specific needs, so we're going to point out a few places where that might need to be applied. And then we also want to provide a seamless transition of CAD files into the design phase. One of the things that we are recommending with this guidebook is a focus on the FDOT CAD manual and utilizing that for the file setup. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tally, and I'll talk to you guys in a little bit.
Thank you, Lauren. Again, I'm Tally Roberts. Thank you for the introduction. And I'm going to go over the resources that we reviewed first and in the development of this guidebook. Relevant data was gathered identifying 2D graphic guidelines within existing FDOT manuals and scopes of services, federal guidance documents, FDOT district-specific guidelines, and other state departments of transportation. Federal guidance documents reviewed were not detailed enough to meet the goals of the guidebook. So most of the most detailed 2D graphic guidelines for FDOT are within the CAD manual. They're already set forth in the CAD manual. The FDOT standard scope of services for PD&E studies states in multiple locations that the consultant will comply with the CAD manual. And in addition, the FDOT design manual describes what should be shown in typical section packages. And the Turnpike Design Handbook contains example drawings. So this 2D and PD&E guidebook was developed by building on these existing FDOT resources and by reviewing examples from FDOT preliminary engineering reports and other state DOTs. As it was mentioned, during project reviews of various PD&E studies, it became apparent that there was a lack of consistency of what features are being shown on project materials and how they were being shown. This guidebook details FDOT preferences for how to display these features on 2D PD&E graphics, which will then in turn provide consistent and complete graphics for each project as they proceed to the next phase. Next, I'm going to go over the features list for the base maps, concept plans, and graphic typical sections. And then after that, I'll show you some examples of each. Both the features list and the example templates are included in the 2D PD&E guidebook. So first, the concept plans features list. When creating base maps and concept plans, it is helpful to categorize what information should be included on the maps. So we first started by pulling all of the layers or levels that are currently in the CAD manual, and to provide graphic consistency between the projects and to facilitate a seamless transition of CAD files into the design phase, we took that master list and created this features list that then can be applied to base maps and concept plans. So every level or layer that was pulled from the FDOT CAD manual was then categorized with either a 1, 2, or 3. And a 1 means that that feature or layer should always be included. And number 2 represents features that should be included if they're available. And number 3 represents features that should be included if they're important to the project. We understand that every project is different. An example of a layer that would receive a number 3 might be wetlands that are impacted by the project, or that the project is designed to avoid. So some projects don't have wetland impacts, so we're not requiring you to show anything wetland-wise, but if it's something that's discussed in the report or that it was an important feature to avoid, we would like to see it on the graphics. The concept plans features list is intended to be used in conjunction with the FDOT CAD manual for consistency with overall guidance and potential future manual updates. After determining that a layer should be included, the practitioner should use the layer or level description from the table to reference the appropriate symbology in the FDOT CAD manual. So we're not trying to rewrite the CAD manual. We're always referring to the CAD manual, and this guidebook and the CAD manual are meant to be used hand in hand. In addition to the standard symbology in the FDOT CAD manual, the concept plans features list includes suggestions for the fill and color of certain elements to encourage graphic consistency and quality. We're excited to let you know that through the process of developing this 2D and PD&E guidebook, we have some new PD&E specific levels that are now included in the FDOT CAD manual for the environmental discipline. These new layers or levels include environmental justice, recreation, floodplains, contaminated sites, and historic sites, to name a few. These layers or levels describe features that are often considered in PD&E study analyses and can now be identified on standard FDOT levels or layers instead of miscellaneous levels or layers. So, you know, the problem with handing down CAD files from the PD&E phase to the design phase, and those impacts may be being shown on a miscellaneous level, it's hard to tell the next designer that's taking over in the design phase what that meant. So these hopefully will help provide a seamless transition between PD&E and design for the next phase. Next, I'm going to go over the graphic typical section features list, which is much shorter. It includes the minimum required information and symbology for graphic typical sections, and excludes typical sections that are developed as part of the typical section package, which are already clearly defined in the FDOT design manual. So these are the simple graphic typical sections that we often use at public meetings or within the body of the report. They don't necessarily need to be as detailed as what we would have in the typical section package. So these features are for those types of typicals. And because the typical section package is the product passed on to the design team, and the graphic typical sections are for presentation purposes, the specific levels from the FDOT CAD manual are not used in this typical section features list. And since specific levels are not required, consultant firms may bring the line work into graphic design software for enhancements, though this is not required. We understand that each firm has different capabilities when it comes to graphic design software. The typical section features list includes a simple list of elements required for all typical sections and a list of elements required if present. Note that the dimension widths should be labeled for all features, and the practitioners should use this list to verify that they have included all required features in PD&E graphic typical sections. So treat it like a checklist, really. Next, I'm going to go over some of the templates that are provided in the 2D and PD&E guidebook. This first one that you see is an example concept plan, 11 by 17 concept plan, and next I'll show a roll plot. But example concept plans and roll plots and typical section templates were created to accompany the features list and to provide a graphical representation of the intent of the features list. These examples are included in Appendix C of the guidebook. These images are examples of applying the suggested standards in the 2D guidebook. So as I mentioned, this is a concept plan template, which illustrates how a project involving widening, bridges, and floodplains would be shown. These same graphics are often common tools for public involvement and project graphics. This is the concept plan roll plot template that is included in the guidebook. We're seeing more and more PD&Es display the concepts on a roll plot format. So we included both the small format 11 by 17 as well as a roll plot example for your use and reference. In this example, we are showing proposed improvements along a more urban corridor with a different set of impacts, contaminated and historic sites, to name a few. Practitioners should use discretion on the graphics prepared for each project. For example, aerial imagery may need to be made darker or lighter. Shapes transparency may or may not be needed. And line thicknesses, especially when working with big roll plots, may need to be adjusted to create a legible set of plans or roll plots. Oh, sorry. I scrolled too quickly. Lastly, this is the graphic typical section example that is included in the guidebook. As mentioned before, these typical sections are intended to highlight the important features of the typical section, such as the lane and sidewalk widths, but don't get into much detail as what would be provided in a typical section package. It is not required to utilize graphic design software to develop your project's graphic typical sections like we have shown in this example. But please note that when graphic design software programs are used that do not utilize FDOT settings, that care should be taken to mimic FDOT display settings for presentation consistency of FDOT 2D materials. Now I think I'm going to turn it back over to Lauren, and I will also pull up the website unless you're able to do that, Lauren.
Angie, can you make me a presenter?
Sure, give me 1 second.
Thank you.
Mm,
All
Isn't
right, well,
right
while
now.
that's happening, yes, show my screen. All right, so you guys are seeing us at the moment, correct? All right, can you see the website?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so if you were going to be, if you were to click on the link that was just shown on the slide, we wanted to show you how to get to the 2D PD&E Guidebook. The Office of Environmental Management, OEM, has their own documents and publications page. For those of you who are not familiar with it, this is an awesome page. It's got a lot of really great information on here. I did, digressing a little bit here, but the one that we're talking about today is the guidance for using 2D technology in PD&E projects. So if you were to click that link, it would download the 2D and PD&E Guidebook. Let me know when you guys can see that. Can you see the 2D and PD&E Guidebook?
Yes, I can.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so we're just going to scroll through this a little bit and kind of reiterate a few of the things that we've already discussed. We showed you the table of contents early in the presentation, but just real quick to recap that. It talks about the purpose of the guidebook, the goals and the intended use, how the guidebook was developed, the features lists for layers and levels for base maps and concept plans, as well as graphic typical sections. And then the example templates and guidance. And then the appendices is where we're actually going to dig into the meat of this. Okay, so the purpose of the guidebook again is to support the preparation of the 2D and PD&E deliverables, such as base maps, alternative concept plans, or plan profiles and graphic typical sections. These are often used in the engineering documents, environmental documents, and public involvement materials for a PD&E study. We already discussed the goals of this guidebook. The biggest one, I say the biggest one, but a main one being to provide graphic consistency between projects. The intended use for this guidebook is that it is intended to be used by all PD&E practitioners for FDOT projects, for FDOT staff and consultants who scope, prepare, or review 2D graphic materials for PD&E studies. So basically everyone who's working on PD&Es can use this PD&E guidebook. As Tally mentioned, we pulled a lot of relevant data as part of the guidebook development to try and determine if there were existing standards that we could reference or mimic as part of this guidebook. Most of the information that we found was FDOT specific, including one district specific guidelines, the FDOT CAD manual, and the PD&E scope of services. So we'll scroll down here. This is a summary of the guidelines that were reviewed as part of the guidebook development. As you can see here, the FDOT CAD manual, the standard scope of services for PD&E studies, staff hour estimation guidelines, the PD&E manual, of course, the FDM, Turnpike Design Handbook, federal guidelines, district-specific guidance, and then other states. We actually found some good information from some other states, including Kentucky, CDOT, and North Carolina. So that was helpful to see that other states are also providing guidance on these types of materials. So the features, layers, and levels list, just to reiterate what Tally went over, the categories that the features, layers, and levels have been broken down into are 1, for always including that layer or level, 2, including if present or available. For example, if there's a bridge on your project, we're saying to include that if it's present or available. And then 3, include if important to the project. Figure 3.1 just goes through again how to use the concept plan features list, identifying the category, the referencing the CAD manual for the level symbology, and then some PD&E specific suggestions for fill if applicable. We know that that's a common way to help make these 2D graphics pop and help the public understand the proposed design. The graphic typical sections, again, Tally went through that. That list is a little bit more simplified because we are not referencing specific CAD levels because the typical section package is already well defined by the FDM, and the graphic typical sections are generally more for public consumption in public involvement materials or to better display the typical sections in a more easily understood format. Tally also went through some examples, and we'll scroll down here into the appendices a little bit to show you a bit more. So Appendix A is a concept plan's features list. In our presentation and earlier in the guidebook, it looked very short, but it's actually quite comprehensive. If you look here, we have several pages of levels and layers that have been categorized into 1, 2, or 3 in column 2 for features that should be shown if present or should be shown if relevant. So 1, 2, and 3. For example, things in category 1 would be things like sheet lines, right-of-way lines, plot borders, those very basic information. In category 2, we're going to see things like easement lines, center line of construction, bridges, bridge piers, some drainage features, crosswalks, pavement markings, signs. So as we're scrolling through here, you see this list is quite comprehensive. Topography, signals, those are all in category 2. And then when we hop into category 3, some things to include if they're important to the project would be some of the utilities, ditch lines, some drainage features, minor drainage features, and things like that. So those would be in your 3rd category. Appendix B is your typical section features list, which Tally already showed in the presentation, fairly simplified. And then Appendix C are some more of the example images of what the concept plans, roll plots, or typical sections might look like with these suggestions and guidelines applied. So this is another image of a concept plan of the same project that Tally showed earlier. But as you can see, some of the shading in this image and the coloring and hatch work, transparency, things like that, we're all utilizing the guidelines that are included in this guidebook. So you can clearly see the widening, the new median and sod, the wetlands and floodplains, and information like that on the concept plan. So it's very clear and consistent. Here's the same image that Tally showed in the presentation with the bridge. Again, one of those features that if it's within your project boundaries, that we would like to see it included under category 2. All right, I'm going to zoom out here so that we can see the roll plot. This is also an image that Tally showed, plus a little bit more once it finishes loading for us. As Tally mentioned, we're seeing these become more and more prevalent in PD&E projects. The great thing about roll plots is in a public meeting environment, this is a great way for the public to get a real feel for the project corridor and be able to kind of see the bigger picture. And then in the digital environment, you can also zoom in and get a lot more detail. But again, the main focus here is the application of the suggestions and guidelines in the guidebook and how consistent the display is and what information is shown on these roll plots. Next will be the typical sections. As Tally mentioned, we're seeing more and more graphic rendered typical sections. That's not required. You can also have more of a wireframe. But the main goal for the 2D PD&E Guidebook is just to mention certain features that should be included and then making sure that the relevant information is labeled. So those are the, that is the 2D PD&E Guidebook. And then I can hop back into the presentation and finish up a few more things. Okay, so that was the link to find the OEM publications page where you can find the guidance for using 2D technology in PD&E projects. We just ran through the 2D and PD&E Guidebook. As we mentioned earlier, there is also a 3D and PD&E Guidebook that is being released by OEM, and there is a webinar on that a week from today, same time, 10 a.m. The contact mailer was sent out January 24th. If you don't have access to the contact mailer or to Learning Curve, you can contact NG in OEM or Catherine. The next slide is Catherine's contact information as the State Environmental Development Engineer at OEM. So Catherine, I'll turn it back over to you and I will change the presenter. Or I can stay here as a presenter if you'd like.
You're good. I did have some questions, and just for everybody that's on the line, for us to get PDH credits on this, I think we need to stay on the line until 10:45. So I'm going to ask Lauren and Tally to pop back up with their cameras. Maybe we can ask them some questions. If anybody has any questions, please let me know. I guess the question I had, you showed us the roll plot and you say you're seeing those more and more. How long, and I was out of PD&E for 4 or 5 years, so how long have you been seeing the roll plots for? It's just been this last year, last 3 or 4 years?
For me personally, it's been at least 6 years because I was in design and then came to planning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So I remember one of my first projects that I had coming into the planning group. We utilized roll plots specifically for our public meetings, for the kickoff, the alternatives meeting, and then the public hearing for that specific project. It was long enough that the roll plot was a better way to display our concept, our design, and PD&E to the public at that point. So.
Okay. And I know we did this because as you guys were reviewing projects, you were seeing inconsistencies. Would you say the inconsistencies were more between the districts or more between which consultant was doing the project? I think you'd mentioned before that the different, obviously different contractors have, or consultants have different tools to work with.
Yeah, that's correct. To me, it was not a district to district difference. It was more of a consultant to consultant difference. Everybody has a different way of doing things, especially when guidelines aren't given for those certain features. But, for me specifically, I was concentrating on, looking at what was presented in the body of the report and trying to correlate that with the actual picture. I like to see the picture. So when things were discussed, like right-of-way impacts or wetland impacts, and then I was questioning, where are these? Are these things that could have been avoided? So having the picture to help paint the story, and then also having that picture being set up in a way that when it does proceed to the next phase, it's more streamlined. And so the next person can understand what was being considered for that project.
Another thing about that too is a lot of times it's not that the information wasn't there, it's just that the team forgot to show it on the concept plans. They obviously did the analysis, it's included in the PER or whatever environmental document we were reviewing for you guys, but they just forgot to include it in the concept plans. So this new guidebook is a great check to make sure that all of the relevant project information is included.
Great. And when you're doing this, I know this has been a task work order that's been going on for a year and a half. You started this, I guess, by reaching out to all the districts and getting their opinions and working with the CAD office. Can you tell us a little bit of the background on how this manual came about?
And Tally, you want to field that one or you want me to?
Sorry about that.
Yeah, so it really was, a conversation between Lauren and I, who were doing a lot of the reviews, just kind of candidly saying, it's hard to put 2 and 2 together on some of the reviews that we were doing as far as, where are these impacts, what's being shown, very inconsistent. Some PERs would have concept plans that were a huge part of the appendix, and then some PERs did not even have concept plans in the appendix, and obviously had the design. So, moving forward and kind of thinking ahead of like, how can we help this be a little bit more streamlined and consistent, but then also, we don't want to recreate the wheel. So the CAD manual has set forth a wealth of information that we want to build upon, and knowing that obviously the CAD manual has frequent updates, we didn't want to kind of lay out specific layers, knowing that this guidebook would be used hand in hand with the CAD manual as it's being updated as years go on. So That's
We
kind
also,
of
when we reached out to the districts, one thing that we wanted to make sure of was that we weren't imposing any standards that didn't make sense or weren't relevant, and we wanted them to work for all of the projects and allow the flexibility and the guidance to make sure that each practitioner could make their 2D graphics relevant for their project. Like Tally mentioned, with the flexibility and how to apply these recommendations to make sure that their 2D graphics look right for each project, adjusting transparencies, colors, even levels and layers. These are recommendations and guidance to provide that consistency and a good check for each project.
And you mentioned that you'd reached out to several different states. I think it was Kentucky and North Carolina and Colorado. And you said you were finding they had similar inconsistencies. Are they also doing similar? Are they going to mandate people use a certain 2D guidelines, or do you know how those states are handling this?
So there wasn't a whole lot. Again, like you just mentioned, there were the 3 states that we found some information from. The state that had the most was NCDOT, where they laid out some really good guidelines of what they expected to see in 2D NEPA deliverables and NEPA graphics. So that information is out there. It seems to be NCDOT is the only one that had them defined to a great level of detail that we could find. But with FDOT projects, again, we were trying to provide that level of consistency across the state for the PD&E projects that are coming through OEM.
Okay, great. And I see we have one question in our question box. It says, where can I locate the environmental layers shown in the presentation? And then contamination, historic resources, etc., in the guidebook.
They were just added.
They're in the FDOT CAD manual.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
not the guidebook at this point, right?
So they're in the FDOT CAD manual. They're at the end of the list.
Very bottom.
Levels and layers, so they're at the very bottom. They were just added.
And I guess, and if the question is, when will you see them in your Microstation file? I guess that would be with the next FDOT Microstation update. You would see that.
Vern might be able to answer that better than us.
I'm not 100%, that's what I would assume.
Okay.
And any other questions?
I don't see any other questions, but please, if anybody out there has any questions, please put them in. Like I said, this is a great guidebook. It's going to be really useful. It's just hard to spend a whole hour talking on it, so we're trying to get we're trying to get you your PDH credit. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in. And I will bring up one thing that I don't know that I don't know that Lauren or Tally even know this. We have had some changes coming from management. They want to see more utilities on our concept plans. So we will be, I guess, moving that up to a 1 level as we do the next handbook update. But utilities are now, as we go from PD&E design to design, they want that on the concept plans. But I did also have another question. When you're looking at the other states' plans, did they normally go to a higher level of engineering detail than we do, or was it similar? Years and years ago, I worked in Illinois, and we tended to do probably up to 60% plans was our typical PD&E study. That was, I'm old. That was 20 years ago. And I just wonder what other states are doing that way. If you noticed.
I haven't had a lot of experience in that yet, but from what I have seen, DOT takes our plans to a great level of detail.
Okay, interesting. Okay.
Tally, have you seen anything different with other states?
No, not in my experience.
No. Okay. So yeah, we got 3 more minutes.
Any other questions?
Any other questions
the attendees?
No.
We can start calling on people.
Well, The question is, can this presentation be shared? And that is yes, we will be putting this on our website so that anybody that didn't see it before can see it later. Here's a question. You mentioned that graphical software is not required for typical sections, and that, I'm sorry, my screen is kind of squirrely, I can't. And that, I can't scroll down one line at a time, I'm sorry. That wireframe is acceptable, there it goes. Is there an instance where a more graphical typical section would be preferred to a wireframe? Is this purely a matter of preference?
So we have found in the PD&E documents that we've reviewed that the graphic typical sections are very common. We're seeing more and more of those. I personally find it a little bit easier to assimilate the information that we're trying to show. They're a great tool for public involvement materials. You see them quite frequently at public meetings. But again, we understand that different firms have different software capabilities. So it's not required, it's just a great tool to present that information in a way that's more easily understood. So somebody who's looking at a wireframe kind of has to, stare at it a little bit and figure out what different sections of line mean versus a colored or rendered version. You're like, oh, green is grass, okay, and gray is pavement. So it just helps understand the information a little bit faster and a little bit easier.
Okay, and I actually now can see questions people were asking, so I apologize. So let me go through the questions real quick. And thank you so much for your questions. The first one is referring to slide 11, and it asks, please expand on the term required. PD&Es are normally conducted without survey, therefore drawings in 2D CAD and labeling existing curved shoulders, bike lane, sidewalks would be substantially increased effort and scope. And I think the difference there is we were talking about proposed typical sections, or not necessarily the existing typical sections. Is that correct, Tally and Lauren? Like if you can.
I do see that we have the word required under the existing column. I guess if, you don't have a surveyed right-of-way line, however, and sometimes you don't have proposed right-of-way lines. Maybe the word required is a little too all-encompassing, but at the same time, right-of-way is one of the main things that we're trying to get across on the typicals.
Agreed.
That's not really answering the question.
Okay, another question, and I guess it'll be for me, is there a plan to make the guidebook mandatory? And then I can't read the rest of it. It said, if so, is there, and then it's ... But anyway, right now it is not a plan to make it mandatory. There's a lot of things changing in the design world. We're, as we mentioned, we're going to be seeing more and more 3D type design. So the answer is no, there's not a plan at this point for it to be mandatory. The next question was, can the roll plot replace the plan sheets for the PER? And that's yes, we have seen roll plots come in as plan sheets for PER. The question is, can we provide a link to the book? Yes, that was towards the last slide of the presentation. Well, there's quite a few questions. These are awesome. So next question is, why are we not including land use in the new roll plot? Do you have an answer for that?
I would say that would be one of the project discretion information, because when you start bringing up land use, that makes a very busy map, depending on, especially if you're in an urban environment or you have a bunch of different land uses within your project. So if land use is something that is of particular importance, then I don't see why you couldn't include it, but it wasn't included in this draft list, or not draft, but you know what I mean, this initial list.
Yeah, and this is our first go with the 2D guidebook, so it will be updated as we get more information and hear more what people are looking for. So the next question, where can I locate the environmental layers show? Oh, I already got that one, sorry. Okay, this question is, we typically refer to the specialty reports relative to the concept. What are your thoughts on adding all this information to the sheets, just besides just the environmental layers, as opposed to keeping the PER sheets more focused on the engineering features?
So that's kind of why we have our concept plans and base maps. And this is how I've kind of treated. You don't want the concept plans to get too busy. I agree. There's a lot of things that could be shown and make things too confusing. And the concept plans, I think, are intended to show those engineering details. Now, base maps, essentially are, what I'm thinking, graphics that could be embedded in the body of the report, graphics that could be used at public meetings, that could be just specific for that feature or impact that you're trying to get across. So no, we're not trying to say everything that is important to your project should be shown on one page. Think of it more like base maps are, complementing either the report or the public meetings, whereas the concept plans are the actual, kind of set of plans that are more engineering specific. Am I saying that correct, Lauren?
Yeah, the only clarification I could add is that, one base map isn't the end all be all. We can see several different versions of it throughout the engineering document. So a land use base map, we can see that where the focus of the base map is your land use or your future land use changes. Another one could be focusing on contamination sites or something like that. So, and we also had another question pop up, it looks like.
Oh,
But hopefully that understands.
Yeah, I'm still kind of rolling down some of them. So next question, I'll go back upwards in just a second. The one question is, do we anticipate commuter rail being shown on the plots? And I would say that should be a layer. I'm sure railroads is a layer, and that would be if your project is in the area of the rail lines. But I guess that, yeah.
Okay. Something else with the land use in regards to land use was the lack of consistent information that's available across the state.
Yeah.
So that was another factor in that.
Also a question about considering the hard copy PER has to be available to the public. How do we handle the roll plots and the hard copy PERs?
Well, you wouldn't have it full size.
Yes. So, when we're going down the roll plot route, meaning the roll plots are taking place of the 11 by 17 concept plans. Typically, we have the main body of the PER report as one PDF and the appendix as a separate PDF. And the roll plot PDFs are in the appendix, making it quite large, and not something that you're really, going to print on an 11 by 17 sheet. The roll plots for public meetings might be separate, so this is really saying that the roll plot is taking place of 11 by 17 sheets and is the concept plan that is should be included in the appendix of a PER, just to tie all of the data together that is spoken about in the body of the report. So that's how I've kind of handled it before, just two separate, the main PER and then the appendix, two separate PDFs.
And if we're talking about a physical hard copy, is that what that question was referencing, yeah. Catherine?
Okay, yeah. So a lot of times we have that physical hard copy as our display boards. So we have the actual physical hard copy of the PER, and the appendices could say, see roll plot over in the corner.
What about like, I know we still, for public hearings, we put the the information out at the public libraries and stuff. You're not using hard copies anymore?
I would suggest it being folded or printed smaller scale. As long as the
Yeah.
relevant information is still visible, we do want to make sure that that information gets across. I would have to double check and make sure what the PD&E manual states as far as concept plans and how that has to be displayed. But
Yeah, somebody
Any
just
other-
reiterating that's got to be available prior to the meeting.
the hard copy.
And with that, I don't see any more questions or comments. So, and I apologize for not seeing those questions before. I guess I'm not as familiar with GoTo as I thought I was. So, but thank you guys for the great questions, and we made it plenty of, the presentation plenty long enough now to get your PDH credit for this. So thank you for helping us out with that. And thank you, Tally and Lauren, you did a great job. And as I mentioned, the 2D guidebook, it'll probably be updated every couple of years just to make sure it's fresh and useful. I know that things have changed since August, obviously, so so that was quick.
And don't forget the 3D and PD&E webinar that is next week.
Thank you, Lauren.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you, guys.
you.
Bye.